Thanks to the experience gained during the refinement of the XP-37 and YP-37, the Curtiss company was able to quickly begin designing their next fighter. However, this time around, the goal was not to perfect the design. The requirements for the new aircraft were much more modest. First and foremost, the requirement was for the new aircraft to share as many parts as possible with the P-36 model. There was absolutely no talk of shifting the cockpit toward the tail section. They planned to install the Allison V-1710 engine on this aircraft, but the supercharging system underwent some serious changes. The technical solution used on the XP-37 turned out to be not very successful, or to be more precise, it was underdeveloped. Usually, the supercharger had to be switched off, which didn't allow the engine to reach its full potential. This was, without a doubt, a weak point in Donovan Berlin's design. The fate of the entire aircraft depended on refining the system. Despite all attempts to improve the turbocharging, it remained unreliable and unsuitable for combat conditions. However, there was an alternative, one that had already been tested on aircraft with radial engines. We are talking about a simple single-stage supercharger, which wasn't driven by exhaust gases but drew power directly from the engine shaft. Of course, such a system was less efficient, but it was significantly more reliable. Donovan Berlin had expressed the idea of installing a mechanical supercharger on the aircraft back in the summer of 1937, and he soon turned that idea into a concrete project. Since the U.S. Army Air Corps was interested in the XP-37, a program for its further improvement was approved. Berlin received permission to continue the work, having one P-36A at his disposal. As a result, he had to leave the existing fuselage unchanged. This allowed for significant savings on materials, and thanks to the compactness of the mechanical supercharger, it became possible to plan the internal structure of the aircraft more efficiently. By that time, the results of the first XP-37 flights were already looking promising. However, at the same time, alarming reports were coming in about the unreliable operation of the supercharging system, which threatened to stall the entire fighter development program. And that is when Donovan Berlin hit the bullseye. The military took an interest in his project specifically. Work proceeded rapidly, and by March 3, 1938, the first performance calculations arrived at Wright Field. They showed that the new fighter not only matched the XP-37 model, but actually outperformed it. At an altitude of almost 14,800 feet, the aircraft hit 350 miles per hour. These figures made a strong impression on the customer. On July 30, 1938, the Curtiss company signed a contract under which a P-36A fuselage was to be modified according to Donovan Berlin's proposals. The aircraft was given the internal designation Model 75P, while its official designation became the XP-40. An Allison V-1710-19 engine was installed on the plane. Its takeoff power was 1,040 horsepower, and at 9,800 feet, this increased to 1,090 horsepower. The prototype had to be ready by February 1939. The XP-40 was an all-metal, single-seat, low-wing monoplane. The engine was situated in the nose. In the center was the cockpit, enclosed by a two-part canopy, a windshield, and a rear section that slid back on special rails. The rest of the fuselage space was taken up by the fuel tank and various equipment. The wing had a trapezoidal shape with a straight leading edge and no sweep. Ailerons and flaps were positioned on the trailing edge. The tail assembly was conventional, consisting of a vertical fin with a rudder and a horizontal stabilizer with elevators. The main landing gear retracted into the wing in an interesting fashion. The strut rotated 90 degrees and folded rearward. This landing gear design became a signature feature of all Curtiss fighters, dating back to the P-36 model. The armament of the prototype consisted of two Browning M2 machine guns mounted above the engine. Just like on the YP-37 model, the left gun was 30 caliber and the right one was 50 caliber. At first, the aircraft took to the skies without any guns, even though all the mounts and protective fairings were already in place. Under the wings of the XP-40, they installed racks to carry 6 20-pound bombs. The XP-40 inherited its airframe from the P-36 almost unchanged, from the cockpit all the way to the tip of the tail. The wings, tail assembly, and landing gear remained the same as well. However, installing the new engine required a complete redesign of the aircraft's internal structure. The engineers added new oil and coolant tanks, as well as a radiator. As a result, a rather massive radiator housing appeared behind the pilot, which, unfortunately, hurt the aerodynamics. The carburetor air intake was placed on top of the engine, while another small opening for the oil cooler was located under the cowling. The new engine cowling was given smooth and streamlined contours. This was critical because the fuselage remained wide, a legacy of the previous, bulkier radial engine. Since the new inline engine was significantly narrower, the free space around it was used to route the air ducts. Balancing the aircraft posed a serious challenge. The long engine shifted the center of gravity forward. To compensate for this weight, the radiator was moved to the rear, as we already mentioned. Furthermore, the Allison V-1710 engine required a propeller with a larger diameter than before. So to ensure the blades didn't strike the ground, the engineers had to lengthen the landing gear struts. The designers had to solve tasks like this every day, but work on the aircraft was moving ahead fast, and all the effort paid off. It turned out that building the prototype's airframe cost the firm only $36,266, and the total expenses came to $51,500. That was twice as cheap as the cost of the XP-37. On top of that, there was hope that if the P-40 was adopted for service, they wouldn't have to seriously rebuild the production lines, and they could also use the existing airframes from the P-36. Assembly of the XP-40 prototype went quickly, and by October 1938, the aircraft was ready for flight. On October 14, 1938, Edward Elliott sat at the controls. The mechanics checked the ship one last time, the pilot strapped in, and taxied to the runway. The XP-40 picked up speed and lifted off the ground. The new fighter had risen into the air for the first time. Although the flight went without incident, it turned out that the aircraft was not demonstrating the calculated characteristics. The maximum speed was only 299 miles per hour, which was even less than the desired barrier of 300 miles per hour. Representatives of potential customers went off to write their reports, and the designers got busy improving the fighter. The airframe structure was subjected to a thorough analysis. After a series of tests in the wind tunnel, it became clear that the reason for the low speed was the poor aerodynamics of the fuselage. To remove the turbulence, the radiator was moved under the engine, increasing the air intake there. The surface of the aircraft was further smoothed, removing anything that could create air resistance. The aerodynamics of the plane really did improve noticeably, but this completely upset the balance. Fortunately, they managed to redistribute the weight inside the aircraft to return the center of gravity to its former place. At the same time, standard armament was installed on the plane. Work was boiling because the 5th fighter competition for the U.S. Army Air Corps was approaching, planned for January 25, 1939. The updated XP-40 had excellent chances for victory. After all the modifications, the aircraft accelerated to 342 miles per hour. By January, the XP-40 was ready for the competition, along with the Hawk 75R and the Seversky AP-4. They planned to show off the XP-37 too, but that plane didn't stand a chance. The XP-37 prototype stayed back in Buffalo, where engineers were trying to work out the bugs. So the XP-40 remained the undisputed leader of the contest. However, final victory was still a long way off. Even back in the previous year, aircraft companies had received a request to build a high-altitude fighter. No one could meet the deadline, so they decided to wait for the results of the January competition first, and then choose the high-altitude bird in the spring of 1939. The commission started the selection process in March. There weren't many options. Seversky presented the AP-9 with a radial Pratt and Whitney R-1830 engine and mechanical supercharging, while Curtiss stepped up again with their XP-40, which had won in January. Since the customers clearly preferred inline engines, the result was entirely predictable. True, Seversky had 2 other projects, the AP-4 and the XP-41, but they were running outside the competition. Actually, the AP-9 was slapped together in a hurry, and even its creators didn't count on it much. The turbo-supercharged AP-4 crashed on March 22nd, and the XP-41 with mechanical supercharging, basically a modified P-35, wasn't ready yet. Almost immediately after the competition results were announced, the Curtiss-Wright Corporation closed a deal for $12.9 million. It called for the construction of 524 P-40 aircraft. This document was signed on April 26, 1939. In this way, the company not only secured its spot on the American market, but also landed a record-breaking contract, since up to that moment, no plane had ever been produced in such a large series. It is worth taking a brief look at the future fate of the competitors that lost out to the XP-40 prototype. Designer Alexander de Seversky continued to perfect his AP-4, trying to outperform the winner. However, the mechanical supercharger installed on the aircraft just could not handle the load at altitudes above 24,600 feet. While this might have been a tolerable flaw for a standard fighter, it was critical for a high-altitude aircraft. That is exactly why the military did not stop with the creation of the P-40 and continued funding alternative projects. The XP-38 and XP-39, as well as the AP-4. Eventually, a turbocharger was installed on the AP-4. This allowed the engine to develop maximum power at 23,600 feet and match the speed of its European competitor, the Spitfire Mark II. And at even higher altitudes, the AP-4 had absolutely no equals. As a result, Alexander de Seversky received an order for 14 AP-4 aircraft, which were assigned the designation P-43. Although the P-43 itself was never fully adopted for service, the P-47 Thunderbolt created based on it played a significant role in the war. The Lockheed P-38 Lightning also turned out to be a successful design, although the planes of the first production series had a scandalous reputation due to an undeveloped turbocharger. The Bell P-39 Airacobra fighter proved itself as an aircraft for medium altitudes and was supplied in large numbers to the Soviet Union under the Lend-Lease program. All the mentioned planes, except for the P-43, were equipped with Allison V-1710 inline engines. Despite the already signed contract, the Curtiss company continued to improve its XP-40 prototype, especially since the military's appetite was growing. Just recently, a speed of a little over 300 miles per hour was considered sufficient. But now the requirements had become stricter. The new goal became the 360 miles per hour mark. Meanwhile, the XP-40, in the best-case scenario, only accelerated to 340 miles per hour. Back in October 1938, the plane underwent some cosmetic changes. The designers reworked the exhaust system and completely changed how air was fed to the carburetor. They removed the air intake from the top of the cowling, deciding instead to use the machine gun ports to bring air in. This solution didn't just reduce drag, it also improved the cooling for the guns. The oil radiator was moved forward a bit, which slightly changed the shape of the so-called beard under the engine. Although all these measures improved the fighter's aerodynamics, its speed still wasn't hitting the desired 360 miles per hour. They decided to carry out further refinements at the NACA laboratory at Langley Field, Virginia, which had a powerful wind tunnel. They tested the aircraft in various modes and figured out that the design was fully capable of delivering the required speed, but it needed a more powerful engine to do it. The XP-40 went back to Buffalo, where they installed an Allison V-1710-33 engine putting out 1,040 horsepower. The new engine required a slightly larger radiator, so a number of other changes were made to the design. The results didn't take long. In December 1939, the plane hit 366 miles per hour at an altitude of 15,000 feet. After that, the aircraft was deemed ready for mass production. During preparations for serial production, the P-40 was assigned the internal designation Model 81. This was because very little remained of the previous Hawk 75 in the new design. Although the XP-40 prototype already had excellent aerodynamics, the designers were able to refine the plane's shape even further before it went into production. For instance, to make the surface smoother, they decided to use flush rivets. The engineers also figured out that combining the carburetor air intake with the machine gun ports wasn't exactly the best idea. The openings were too small for effective airflow, and making them bigger wasn't an option, plus it required a complicated piping system. So on the production aircraft, they ditched this setup. Instead, they installed a separate intake on the cowling right between the gun barrels, and under the engine, they placed that distinctive beard which housed the radiators for cooling the oil and water. American pre-war fighters lagged behind their European counterparts, not just in speed. Another flaw of these overseas aircraft was their weak armament. As previously mentioned, the arsenal of the XP-40 consisted of just 2 machine guns, a 30 caliber and a 50 caliber. That might have been enough against Japanese planes, but the experience from the war in Spain showed that 2 guns, with one being of rifle caliber, was clearly not enough. That level of firepower really belonged in the late 20s. But over the past decade, aviation had made a massive leap forward. Planes didn't just get more powerful engines, they also became tougher and were equipped with armor protection. The designers of the P-40 came to similar conclusions, so they decided to beef up the aircraft's armament. They swapped out the 30 caliber machine gun under the cowl for a more powerful 50 caliber one. On top of that, they installed another 30 caliber machine gun in each wing outside the propeller arc. Just like that, the firepower of the aircraft more than doubled. Now, the fighter's armament could finally be considered adequate. Designer Donovan Berlin proposed moving all the weaponry directly into the wings. At first glance, this made sense. Machine guns in the wings didn't increase the plane's silhouette, didn't require synchronization with the propeller, and didn't complicate the assembly process. However, there was a catch. The wing guns had to be mounted at a slight angle so the bullet trajectories would converge at a single point in front of the aircraft. That meant pinpoint accuracy was guaranteed only at that specific convergence point. Any closer or farther away, the bullets would scatter and firepower efficiency dropped. Because of this, Donovan Berlin's proposal was turned down. Berlin, being a confident and ambitious man, was absolutely furious that his opinion had been disregarded. Arguments over the supercharging system added even more stress for the designer. Tension began to build within the team, leading inevitably to a breakdown in relationships. The first production P-40s were powered by Allison V-1710-33 engines. The first aircraft rolled out of the assembly hall in March 1940. After thorough ground checks, on April 4th, Curtiss test pilot Lloyd Child took the fighter up for its maiden flight. The first 3 units were used for experimental testing. One plane stayed with the company for working out various modifications, while the other 2 were handed over to the U.S. Army Air Corps for testing under real-world conditions. It turned out that the weight increase of the production fighter compared to the prototype, from 6,280 to 6,780 pounds, had almost no effect on its performance. At an altitude of 15,000 feet, the aircraft reached a top speed of 357 miles per hour, and its service ceiling was 32,750 feet. It could climb to 15,000 feet in just over 5 minutes. The flight range reached 950 miles. That was more than twice as much as the Bf-109 or the Spitfire had. But in other respects, the P-40 looked pretty mediocre compared to the European aircraft. It lagged behind them in speed, and the simple mechanical supercharger only worked effectively up to an altitude of 16,400 feet. On the other hand, the P-40 had a colossal structural strength, which allowed it to be used as a bomber and a ground attack aircraft. The plane was distinguished by its amazing survivability, staying in the air with damage that would have been fatal for other models. Out of the 524 aircraft ordered, 200 were built. The first planes went to the 8th Fighter Group, and all 200 aircraft were handed over to the customer by September 15, 1940. These airframes served with the 20th Fighter Group at March Field and the 31st Group at Selfridge Field. 16 fighters were transferred to the Soviet Union under the Lend-Lease program. The service of the American P-40s of this series lasted until September 22, 1942. There was also a P-40A modification, although only one such plane was actually produced. In March 1942, at Bowling Field Air Base, a standard production model was converted to this configuration. The P-40A was a reconnaissance plane equipped with camera gear. Most likely, this airframe was later transferred to the British. In England, the plane received the standard designation P-40 Tomahawk Mark I. Ultimately, the P-40 proved that raw speed and altitude were not the only metrics of a successful fighter. It was available when the Allies needed modern aircraft and saw combat in all major areas of World War II. While it may not have been the most advanced fighter of its time, its reliability and heavy firepower made it a valuable machine. The Tomahawk remained operational until newer generations of fighters replaced it.